Over the past century, the state of Texas has been an oil superpower that became the driving force of prosperity and dominance, both for the people of Texas and the entire United States. Today, Texas provides 42% of the oil production in the country, which is the US that is also the largest oil producer in the world. To give you an idea of how dominant Texas is in oil production, Texas produces more oil than China, Norway, and Brazil combined. You might think that this is all great for Texas, but throughout its 100-year history, Texas actually has had a turbulent relationship with oil. This is a state built from scratch by oil, went on to have a massive economic crisis because of oil, and later recovered and went on to have a thriving economy with oil. You see, Texas today has one of the youngest population in the US, with a median age of just 35.2, in addition to having the fastest population growth in the country. This abundance of young, skilled, and productive workforce in turn has made Texas far more than just oil. It became an important producer of high-tech equipment and petrochemicals. It has a strong manufacturing, lots of huge factories, homes, and highways that have revived its real estate industry, the banking sector is thriving, and Texas remains a major energy producer. But this is not always the case, and there is a time when oil actually became a curse to the economy. So, to trace the Texan economic miracle, we need to go back in time and review its long history with oil. How did Texas turn itself from desert plains and remnants of the Wild West into a thriving industrialized state? How did the curse of oil hit the Texan economy hard at a time when the rest of the country was thriving? And finally, how did Texas recover from the crisis and come back better than ever and diversify to other industries while still keeping its oil dominance at the same time? Okay, so Texas oil dominance started way back in the early 1900s, when, as you can already guess, they found lots of oil under the land surface. But even hundreds of years before, when the Europeans came, Native Americans already knew about the existence of oil near the Texas region. A bit of fun fact, before the 1850s, oil is seen as more of a burden rather than a blessing by most people, including Texans. This is because it hindered the digging of water wells, which makes sense, since the 1850s Texas was a predominantly rural region and the people were mostly farmers and ranchers. William Thomas, a rancher who later got rich because of oil, was quoted saying that, "I wanted water and they got me oil. I tell you, I was mad clean through. We needed water for ourselves and for our cattle to drink." Of course, this sentiment changed drastically in the 1900s when oil suddenly became a valuable commodity as a source of fuel, especially when in 1901, they hit the jackpot and found one of the largest oil fields ever, the Spindletop, which produced 100,000 barrels of oil per day. At the time, that was an unbelievable number. As oil was found, Texas instantly became a boomtown with investors all over the country speculating and began buying every piece of land they saw, with the hope that they will find oil beneath them. Speculation in Texas land immediately surpassed speculation in Pennsylvania and was worth about $235 million or 7.6 billion in today's dollars. With the oil boom and the findings of many other oil deposits, Texas has suddenly grown from a rural, mostly barren land into a fully industrialized state. With lots of oil, then came miners and oil production companies. To be able to extract and transport the oil, they needed railroads, refineries, and oil dairy. So lumber production thrived, and this created employment opportunities for woodworkers. These miners and workers need homes to live in, so there's much demand for construction workers. After many homes were built, then came service workers and industries such as restaurants, theaters, supermarkets, and pubs. Suddenly, you have a city. This is how most cities in Texas, including Houston and Dallas, were developed. The boom has such a major effect that they were called cities the Great Depression forgot, because they fared better than many other cities that underwent significant economic crises. In 1940, Texas GDP has grown from 119 million to 29 billion from when oil was found and exploited. That's a 240-fold increase in the span of 40 years. This remained a huge driver of growth in Texas all the way up until the 1970s, when it was all driven to insanity. OPEC is an international cartel formed in 1960 by oil-rich Middle Eastern countries like Saudi Arabia, Iran, and Iraq. They now had 13 member countries and control 81% of the world's oil reserves. America wasn't a part of OPEC, but the huge scale of OPEC meant that America was nevertheless affected by it. In 1973, the members of OPEC, led by the Saudi Arabian king himself, led an oil embargo for nations that supported Israel during the Yom Kippur War. First in 1973 to 1974, and then again in 1978 to 1979. This includes Canada, Japan, UK, the Netherlands, and of course, the United States. The sudden fourfold increase in the price of oil pushed the world into an oil crisis, and the US went on a decade of long and brutal stagflation. Except, when the rest of the US were suffering, Texas was thriving. In a period when more and more Americans were buying and driving cars, while moving into suburban homes that not only required longer commutes, but were also much more demanding on energy to heat, light, and operate. Couple this with sky-high oil prices, and it was a recipe for disaster for most American households, except for Texans who underwent a prosperous decade because it has oil. Research from the Fed Bank of Dallas pointed out that, in the 1980s, a 10% hypothetical decrease in oil prices could wipe out about 1% of jobs in Texas. Or to put it differently, if oil prices decrease by 10%, around 150,000 people in Texas would be laid off. That's just how dependent Texas was on oil back then. Now, the sudden oil boom made a lot of Texans very wealthy. The profitability of Texas oil production surged and many became overnight millionaires. They took out millions in loans to buy more equipment and search for more oil. And many people flocked to Texas to search for work, triggering population growth. These Texan overnight millionaires also started investing in real estate. After all, in a city with a growing population and commerce, it seems logical to invest big in houses, malls, condos, and skyscrapers. This peaked in the 1980s, when not only that oil prices rises even higher, but Texas also introduced tax breaks and banking policies that went on to fuel an overinflated real estate market that went beyond what the economic fundamentals could support. And back then, this decision was made because analysts and forecasters at government institutions and the University of Texas predicted that OPEC will keep oil prices artificially high, and it would only keep rising. But of course, good times don't last forever, and the breaking point came in 1986, when OPEC, instead of keeping oil prices high, flooded the market with their low-cost supply. They do this to shake out higher-cost producers, like Alaska, Norway, and also Texas, in order to regain their dominance as the largest oil producer. After more than 10 years of Texas riding on OPEC's coattails, it was also OPEC that went on to cause Texas's downfall. In 1986, as oil prices fell by 70%, it crushed the oil producers and the Texas economy along with it. It hit them incredibly hard. The state immediately eliminated its tax breaks, then real estate prices plunged and a lot of banks failed, especially banks that were relying heavily on construction loans. Then many people lost their jobs, and bankruptcies, widespread foreclosures, and abandoned half-built skyscrapers became commonplace throughout the 1980s. Ironically, this was at a time when the rest of the country was prospering because of low oil prices. In 1989, for example, 65% of all US bank failures were located in Texas. From that point onward, oil production in Texas suffered a slow decline as not only foreign oil became abundant and cost competitive, but Texas also had to compete with other US states such as Alaska, North Dakota, and New Mexico. However, the Texas economy managed to shake off its dependency on oil and diversify itself into other knowledge-based industries, instead of relying on its finite natural resources. You see, the low oil prices that we've seen in the 1990s and the 2000s made drilling just straight up unprofitable by oil companies, so Texas oil production continued to deteriorate. By the year 2000, Texas oil production has fallen to levels last seen in the early 1930s, and it became clear that peak production levels for Texas oil were reached back in the 1970s. But that doesn't mean Texas won't benefit from oil. They're just becoming less dependent on it, and they also found different ways to benefit from it. The 1900s also saw a period when technological innovations like 3D seismic, horizontal drilling, and coiled tubing allowed oil producers to extract oil at a lower cost, and enabled drilling in places that were previously just too expensive. So Texas, with its long history of oil production, eventually resorted to producing this equipment and selling them to other oil-producing countries like Canada, Mexico, and China. But not only that, Texas has also become the manufacturing powerhouse of the United States. Since the 1980s bust was over, Texas has become a leader in the production of computers, semiconductors, and telecommunications. This happened because manufacturing companies and tech companies alike were attracted by a large supply of low-cost land and labor that Texas can offer. And ironically, it was the oil bust that led to cheaper land and labor that attracts companies to set up its operations there. To give you a simple example, Tesla Gigafactory, which is Tesla's corporate headquarters and also the second biggest factory in all of the USA, is located in Austin, Texas. These advances in high-tech manufacturing have become the main source of revenue for the Texas economy. They are still an oil giant, sure, but today, oil only makes up of around 10% of the Texas economy. This diversification helped Texas a lot during the 2020 pandemic, as grounding planes, halting commutes, and grinding global shipping to a halt meant that demand for oil took a massive hit, and OPEC briefly made oil to have a negative value in early 2020. If Texas didn't diversify its economy back in the 1990s, the damage created by the pandemic would be a lot more devastating to the Texan people. This is Doverhill, and see you next time.